Thank you for joining us today for a 2021 Job Market Outlook discussion. My name is Mark Angott. I'm the co-president of the Southeast Michigan Club at Michigan Ross. At this time, I would like to acknowledge my fellow co-presidents, Will Foss and John Rothschild. The Southeast Michigan Club at Michigan Ross serves Ross alums throughout Southeast Michigan through networking events, community service, providing an opportunity to speak with notable alumni, and professional development, such as today's event. We are very proud to be hosting today's discussion. A few things to note before I pass it over to the panel. All attendees are muted and videos are hidden. Please feel free to submit questions for Q&A in the Q&A feature and leave comments in the chat feature, such as what city you are joining us from today. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Heather Byrne, the Managing Director of the Ross Business School Career Development Office. Heather.
Thank you, Mark, and welcome everyone. Excited to have you all on this event today. My name is Heather Byrne, and I am the Managing Director of the Career Development Office at Ross. I've been here for about 14 years, and I ran our full-time MBA program prior to this role. I'd like to have the panelists introduce themselves. So if we could start with Mark, please.
Thank you, and thanks to the team at Ross for putting together this panel. So I'm Mark Angott. I'm president of Angott Search Group. A quick background on myself: I have an accounting degree, was a controller for a small company for 5 years before stumbling into the search business in 1981. So this year in March, or in 1981, will be our 40th year in business. Our firm primarily recruits heavily in financial services. That's what I've done for most of those years, is in banking, financial services. But we also have a team. We, being in the Motor City, we have an automotive group, so they do automotive and manufacturing. We have a team that works in the energy field, also finance. We do a lot of general management positions, and that's our world. So we're constantly filling a variety of middle and senior management positions for corporate America in wide geographics. That's
Great.
me.
Thanks so much, Mark. David, let's go to you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks to the club as well for hosting us, and pleasure to be with you all. My name is David Parent. I am the managing partner for Deloitte here in the state of Michigan. Some have already asked about my background. That is the view of from our Deloitte office in the Renaissance Center of the Detroit River. And no, I'm not there in person. I've only been there one day since last March. I am a two-time U of M graduate from the Ross School, although I usually have to caveat it. It wasn't known as the Ross School when I graduated the first time. And then as Lou Ekin from the Taubman College acknowledged, I also did a master's degree in urban planning from U of M as well. And again, thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks, David. And Lisa, let's turn it over to you.
Sure. So yes, I'm Lisa Morgan. I'm the Ross Alumni Career Coach. My job here is to help alumni in all phases of career transition from initial, kind of that initial soul searching and gaining clarity, to rebranding, networking, interviewing, and negotiating. I've been in this role for the past year, but doing this work for the past 20 years. I'm also a graduate of Ross, and I also graduated from Ross before it was the Ross School of Business, but back when it was the Michigan Business School. So really glad to be here, Heather. Thanks.
All right, thanks everyone. Okay, let's start with our first question, which I think is probably most top of mind for everyone. What does the job market look like right now from your vantage point? And what do you see as the hiring outlook for 2021? David, I'll have you get started.
Sure. I think when we talk about the market, the job market in general, I think we have to acknowledge there's still a lot of uncertainty. I think there's mostly optimism that 2021 will be better than 2020, but there's still a lot of uncertainty. And a lot of that uncertainty comes from the public health situation and things like how fast can we get the vaccine distributed and things like that. I even noted a few headlines from this morning, headlines like Ohio jobless claims rise again amid uncertainty. Jobless claims fall in Michigan, but remain at historic highs. Or another was Georgia job market is mixed. And that's all from this morning. So I think those are representative of kind of where we are. I do think we also have to peel the answer back a little bit and go a little deeper when answering that question, because there are parts of the economy and parts of the job market that are quite hot, and we'll talk about that throughout the session today. But there are obviously some sectors of the economy that have been hit tremendously hard. So areas obviously like retail and restaurant and many services have been hit really hard. I was talking to a colleague this morning who focuses on transportation, and his clients are still in tough shape. So some economists are using the term a K-shaped recovery. In the early days of the pandemic, there were debates. Is it going to be a U-shaped recovery, V-shaped, W-shaped? K seems to be the hot letter of recent days or weeks, to reflect that there are kind of two parts of the economy right now, not only along the lines that I mentioned, but also, unfortunately, from a societal perspective, the part of the K that's on an upward trajectory. By and large, those of us, and I think, given this is a U of M alumni event, I think, by and large, we're college graduates from a very good institution. People with our backgrounds in general have fared better in this economy and in this job market. And unfortunately, those who aren't as privileged to have had the kinds of degrees we have and education and so on, the downward part of the K represents that the recovery that we've had to date, and probably the recovery we'll continue to have, has not been even across the economy and society. So in short, a little bit of optimism, still a lot of uncertainty, but you also have to dig in a little bit deep, because it's not a one-size-fits-all answer depending on your background, depending on what part of the economy you focus on.
Mm-hmm. Right. Great. Okay. Thanks, David. Mark, let's turn it over to you for your perspective.
David hit almost all the hot buttons that I would talk about. I was just recently at an economic forum virtually, and that was the first word. It was uncertainty. I mean, it really is. I mean, if you go back a year ago from now, everything was booming and it was rosy, and the unemployment situation was really at a record level, so positive. And then the pandemic hit and everything changed. And now what's going to go on, and how quickly are we going to get the vaccine out? And as David so aptly said, some industries have just been pounded, and how long will it take to recover? If you're in the hospitality or you're in the travel, or as you said, retail, some industries, just in restaurants, they may never come back, and they may never come back to what we knew. If you look in Michigan and in the Midwest, which were so affected by automotive slowed way down also. I mean, people were still buying cars, but the suppliers really slowed down, and the big three slowed down. So lots of changes there. We do believe that those things are going to come back, and I do think you'll see them slowly come around. So there will be opportunity there, but it's going to take a while. I am optimistic. I think most people that are looking at economics are optimistic that we'll get through 21, but most are saying 22 will be when we'll fully come back to normal. Obviously, we have a new administration in place this week. That did have some effect. The energy world is greatly affected by the Biden administration. Renewable energies, he's really strong on in his administration, where the Trump administration wasn't. So people that want to touch the renewable energy sector, they're going to see lots of opportunity, because that's going to open up where it did not before. And there will be some other areas as well. But to sum it up, I'd say cautiously optimistic.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Lisa, what about you? What are you seeing from your alumni?
Sure. I love that that metaphor of the K-shaped recovery. I would definitely say it's been a tale of two job markets, both, companies and industries that are struggling and companies and industries that are thriving. On a positive note, I saw 10 to 12 alumni getting job offers in the 2 weeks before the holidays. really surprising. And, it just goes to show that whole theory about how, nobody gets jobs during December is just really not true. But where those jobs are coming are in technology for sure. And not just big tech, but emerging companies that are coming up with apps to help us with contactless purchases and with things that we used to purchase in person, right? For instance, there was that company Vroom that we just featured on our LinkedIn alumni group that had something like 95 job openings, right? It's a used car service that's digital, right? And an app. And they're hiring all over the country. So some really exciting things happening there. Also with big box stores, grocery, delivery services like DoorDash and Grubhub, they've hired a number of our alumni. Some healthcare, especially digital and tech related, is thriving. And in auto, we're seeing some hiring, especially with the move to electrification, I think is really revitalizing that industry. So companies like Rivian and even Lordstown Motors in Ohio is also doing hiring. Now, on the flip side, I think is what we've heard with all this uncertainty, the big banks in New York, I think are really pulling back and shrinking right now. And then there seems to be some real, cautiousness in consulting as well. Although we did have that conversation that in the public sector, in the federal sector, for instance, there is some hiring that's taking place. In fact, one of our alumni just landed a position with one of the consulting firms working for the federal government.
Great. So
Lisa, can I jump in and dovetail off a comment you made?
Sure.
You hit a lot of things very well. We don't claim to be an economic indicator in our firm, but we are filling middle and senior management positions, and we're actually been fairly busy. And you wouldn't think so if things were really slow. So we also filled a number of positions at the end of the year in a variety of different sectors. So there is opportunity. And you were correct with the big money center banks. They are laying off. Yet the community banks and the small to mid-sized banks throughout our country are doing extremely well. The PPP, both the first round kept the banks really busy. And now, as most of you probably know, that just started round 2 last week. So they're really busy. And, we're also very busy in the mortgage banking world, and that business has gone very strong. And, right here in Detroit, we have some major players, with Quicken and Rock and United Shore. So there's some big players there that are constantly hiring as well.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear all of your perspectives, because I live in a world that's a little bit isolated, if you will, just because we're working with recent college graduates and students getting ready to move into the employment world. And what we've seen is internships have been the same, if not more, which makes sense because companies don't have a complete obligation there. But we also know they usually want to hire from their internship pool. It's a little bit more of a, what you're getting, and you've had a chance to observe that student and how they work and what a great fit they may be for the organization. So internships we've seen be very steady, if not a little bit higher. Full-time hiring was down this fall on campus virtually. But that was because a lot of the students who had internships over the summers got offers before their internships even began, which was something we had never seen before. So I'm interested to see how things play out full-time hiring in the next couple of months. I'm hoping and anticipating that we will see a slight uptick now that companies that most of our students would go to work for have got a great way of working virtually. They're no longer in a position where they were last year in March, April, where they were trying to rediscover how this was going to work for them. But I'm hoping that we see a slight uptick. And given that most of our students go into consulting, tech, and financial services, I think we should be fairly okay in that space, given that they're not going into hospitality, tourism areas that have been more affected. So great, some really good perspectives here. So let's move on to the next question. We started talking a little bit about this. Some of you started, and let's dig in a little bit deeper. What jobs will be in demand and what jobs will be harder to find? Mark, let's start with you.
Well, and we did touch on this a little bit, but you look at software engineers, you look at digital marketing or digital banking. What Lisa mentioned, Vroom, that's a really good example. of going digital. There's high-end marketing roles that'll still be in demand. We know that the auto industry is changing dramatically. So the electronic vehicle market is really where it's all going to be. Even look at what GM did recently, changed their logo, made this big push capital-wise to go into electrical vehicles. So you're going to see more of that. The advanced driver assistance systems, anybody that touches that market will be hot, as well as AI. So there's going to be jobs that are in demand in that area, but still the basic engineering and product development, they'll be out there as well. So it is those things. And as David said, people that are highly educated, and people from Ross really are, there is an advantage to that because there still will be demand for those key roles.
Yeah, David, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll say technology a lot through this conversation. That's an area for sure that a lot of demand across most sectors. Data analytics, data science, people with really good quantitative skills, even if they don't necessarily have to be, have a degree in data science or what have you, but just those quantitative skills are in extreme high demand across most sectors. Supply chain and logistics, a lot of sectors, a lot of organizations are having to rework their supply chains or strengthen their supply chains, or looking at their global model in a new light. So supply chain, logistics, healthcare is obviously, a lot of demand right now. And that's a long-term trend. I don't think healthcare is going to slow down in the long term. And even some manufacturing is hot. Again, it depends kind of what sector within manufacturing, who your customers are. And in a place like Detroit, we still hear shortages of skilled trades. That's not really necessarily the audience on this call, but there's still a tremendous gap in skilled trades in manufacturing.
Okay, great. I think this one is a topic that a lot of people may be interested in who are tuning in today, and that is, what career advice would you have for people seeking in 2021? Lisa, let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah. So I would always say a first step is to get clear on what your goals are in your next move. And then also determine what's realistic for you, right? Given where you've been and where you want to go. And in that process, I also really recommend that you have conversations with people about that to bounce your ideas off of them and get other perspectives. So for instance, you can absolutely start with a career coach like me, for instance, really to give you some feedback on what you're looking at, as well as to help you add structure and accountability to the search process. The other thing is then to do that early stage networking, talk to other folks who are in your target industry or in target roles that you're interested in, and get their feedback on you, and find out about what segue roles might be appropriate for you, for instance. The other thing that I would say to anybody is, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Heather, and I know that Steve Dalton, the author of the 2-Hour Job Search, who we are so fond of here at Ross. We featured him a couple times on webinars and so forth. Steve recommends starting with a list of 40 target companies, which a lot of people are really surprised at, but that's what you want to do. And of course, you're going to prioritize those target companies and, pick off your first 5 to 6 and really go after them with research and networking and that sort of thing. But you can't assume that your top 1 or 2 or 3 companies like Amazon, Google, Facebook, for instance, are going to hire you, right? You've got to, to have those B and C companies that also look promising that you're interested in. The other thing that I would say is, don't give up. The proactive job search is a lot of work and requires a lot of patience in the process. I work with a number of people in the past year who are in what I call the long-term unemployed category. Those would be folks who've been without a job for like a year or more. And, believe it or not, most of them landed positions this past year, even in the middle of a pandemic. So it is possible, but you have to be patient, persistent, very adaptable, and keep getting back up on the horse.
Yeah, we often talk about the psychological and emotional fortitude it takes to go through a job search process. So Mark, what do you have to say about career advice for people who may be seeking this year?
First of all, that was great advice that Lisa just said. She summed up a lot. And I want to just echo on one thing she said. She said the career coach. Well, yeah, getting a career coach is great. I would say the same as getting a mentor. If there's somebody you highly respect that you worked with, worked for, in your industry or without, it's just great to have a sounding board for the same reason that Lisa talked about. You need somebody to bounce off ideas, ask for thoughts, just to help you with your career. I couldn't stress that enough, that for somebody to reach out, and don't get discouraged if the first one, go get a second one. I mean, it's really important. You want to keep developing your skills, get involved, network as much as you can. Work on your interpersonal skills as much as you can, because so many people sit behind a screen and they forget about their interpersonal skills, how important it is, even and written skills, because sometimes you write jarbled emails and you don't remember that good writing skills is very important to some companies. So that's another thing to work on. But you can get involved in groups, you can get involved in LinkedIn, you can get involved in trade associations. There's things to get involved to keep networking and growing your sphere of influence. That's what you want to do. The more people you can network with, the better you are, because you don't know where that next career move is going to come from. As Lisa said, with the 40 companies, how do you know in that list of people you make all those contacts that there's people that aren't, networked into those key companies that you want to be involved in? And that really helps a lot.
That's where the Michigan and the Michigan Ross Network is such a benefit to be a part of.
That's
Dave,
for sure. I mean,
yeah,
to play off that and to see who's involved in or been a connection at Ross, boy, that's great stuff.
yeah,
And to use that connection.
definitely. David, what about you? What advice do you have?
Yeah, a few things. We talked about technology. So even if you're not, an IT professional or a computer programmer, emphasize the technology experience you do have, whether it's classes you took or software you use and you're familiar with, or maybe projects you've been a part of. We use the term tech fluency. Demonstrate your technical knowledge, even if you're not a deep technologist. Associated with that, I talked to some of our own recruiters. One of the tips they said is be ready for a technology-based interview process. The feedback I got is you'd be surprised how many people say they're strong in technology, but then they don't know how to use Zoom, or they haven't thought about their lighting or their background or the bandwidth in their house, or they don't seem quite comfortable doing an interview over technology. So be ready for a technology-based interview. Tailor your resume. I don't think this is new to recent times, but tailor your resume to the audience. So for example, if you're in a sector that, if you're thinking about going toward one of these hotter sectors that maybe you don't have experience with, put your experience in the eyes of that other sector. You probably have more relevant experience than you realize, but you may have to do a little bit of work to tell the story in the view from that sector. And I think that's easier than ever to do with the convergence of different sectors. Like, we all read the headlines today, some of the large pharmacy chains that are right now basically healthcare organizations in the middle of vaccine distribution, but they also have amazing technology they're using to help schedule and distribute vaccine. So they're technology firms, retail, health, all in one. So I think with a little creativity, you actually can tell your story from another sector's perspective a little easier than you might realize. A couple tactical tips. Suggestion is ease off on your geographic restrictions for at least the foreseeable future, and maybe longer. Where you work may matter less. Now, some jobs it may be clear you have to be in a certain location, but in certain kinds of jobs that may not matter as much. So just because a job posting may say a location that you may not be interested in, don't immediately move beyond that, because that might be more flexible than you realize. And I think Mark alluded to this. The last tip would be, a lot of companies get a lot of resumes and they go through them quickly. They use technology to screen some resumes. They do assessments to screen further. one of the goals that was suggested to me is a goal should be try to get a conversation with a live person, even if it's only a 10-minute. My recruiter said they have a hard time saying no. If someone reaches out to them and says, can I even get just a 15-minute introduction to introduce myself and my credentials? If you can get that kind of conversation, that's a starting point. It's not a guarantee, but you're much better off than having just relied on hoping your cover letter and resume make it through those filters.
Great. Some really good advice. Kind of along the lines of that transferable skills, what skills should alumni look to develop to keep themselves marketable and relevant, especially as we see some of the shifts that we see? And how do you go about translating your skills across industry if needed? Mark, let's hear what your thoughts are.
Well, first of all, try to stay involved and read and study the industries that you want to be involved in. There's so much now that you can do to stay current on industries. And that's what I talked about earlier, networking, talking to different people, getting involved in different associations, even going to LinkedIn. There's so many groups that you can join. There's no limit. You can join tons of groups that always have advice and are giving tips and things for you to learn with. And you want to be constantly learning all the time. And I think that's really important for most people.
Great. What are your thoughts, Lisa, on this as from the career coaching perspective?
Sure. So first of all, to kind of, add to what Mark just said, we also have the Kresge Library research databases. So if you are needing to research an industry, for instance, or a company, you can really drill down using the D&B Hoover's database, for instance. So that is available on the Kresge Library alumni page. It's pretty easy to navigate to. So keep that in mind in case you haven't used that resource. The other thing that I would say is I love to take a page from our younger alumni's book. And what I see them doing is, they're graduating with their BBAs or their MBAs, and they're turning right around and getting certifications in data analytics and data science. It's really quite commendable. The other thing that I would say I'm seeing a lot is this need to becoming conversational and lean, right? If you're in operations, but not just operations, manufacturing, but also any kinds of, transactional roles, process improvement, Kaizen, 5S, and so forth. Those things are becoming very important in business, and businesses are going to be more interested in you if you can talk about your ability to do process improvement. I would also say, obviously, if you're in tech, there's so many tools that you can learn. Understanding Agile, for instance, is, and all the tools that go along with that. Those are great things to do. And finally, PMP certifications are still a good idea for people who are in project or program management.
Great. Awesome. Okay, perfect. We do have a question from our audience, from Ashish. So he's curious, what has been the impact on the gig economy? Has it been beneficial for positions such as food delivery services and detrimental for positions such as ride sharing, Airbnb type of gigs? Thoughts on that?
I think by and large, the pandemic has been positive for the gig economy, the gig workers, both because, as the question alluded to, there's heightened demand in a lot of these areas for more gig workers. And I think companies have also been hesitant to just add full-time employees given uncertainty. So they're looking for models to meet their demand for talent in, you could say, less risky ways. So it's been both greater demand for gig type workers coupled with uncertainty on the traditional company side that I think has fueled a lot of growth in gig worker demand. And I think that is one of those longer term trends that will continue post pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right, exactly.
Yeah,
Any
and
other?
I'm sorry, Heather, what I would add to that is that, we know that whenever there's a recession, that the, temporary service firms, staffing firms are usually the ones who help take us out of it. So for folks who are, in the long-term unemployed or longer term unemployed, and you're looking for some kind of a solution to get you back into the workforce, looking to staffing firms is actually a pretty good idea.
Right, exactly.
I would echo that. That's what you see as the temp and the contract world really picks up because it takes the stress off of companies, for sure.
Right, exactly. All right, so audience, if you have any more questions, please put them in the Q&A. Do you have something else to ask our panelists? We've talked a little bit about this, but maybe we can refine it a bit, talking about trends that you observed from companies hiring and companies contracting in 2020. What kind of trends did you see, and what do you think we can learn from those trends looking ahead?
I'll jump in to say that one thing you learn is that even when times get tough, there's good companies that are looking to hire. And sometimes even the strong companies find that as a real positive to hire because they know their competitors aren't. So they take it as a time to really go get some top talent where everybody else is sitting on the sidelines. We've seen that a little bit in automotive because sometimes they react, some of the suppliers will react slowly. Then the top tier ones will say, no, this is a time when we're going to go get the talent and really take ourselves to another level. And that may surprise some people, but it's really true. You might look out and say, these are fairly tough economic times. Well, there's still good companies that are out there to look to hire. And you can't get discouraged because if you put enough word out, it goes back to that list Lisa talked about earlier. There will be companies on that list that you can overturn and find somebody that's looking to hire the right talent.
And even within the same companies, there are parts of companies that are hiring while other parts of the same company are not. Lisa mentioned, electric vehicles. There's high demand for people with relevant skills there, but perhaps less so in other parts of the same companies. In my own company at Deloitte, we have some areas we're hiring, frankly, like crazy. Some other areas where we're being a little more conservative. So kind of like the same answer I gave before, there's no one size fits all. Different sectors, some are growing, some are not, different companies, but even within some companies, you really have to do your homework to understand where are they hiring, where are they looking to grow, and maybe some areas where they're not. And then focus, obviously, where the demand is.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, great. Lisa, did you have anything to add on the trends?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, it's so easy to do research now. And so, tracking the financial news, here in Detroit, we can read Crane's Business, but also like you can Google, for instance, LinkedIn puts articles on like the top 100 startup companies. And I looked at that recently and it's all tech. I think probably 99% tech. So look at those technology companies that are emerging. They're the ones who are hiring. They're scaling up and they're hiring tons of people. So really keep an eye on that and get a jump on that before you're in the job market, right? Try to track it over time so that when you need to actually make a change, you've already done some research and you're already pretty well educated.
Great.
That's very important if you ever get an interview with a company. Now, because of what Lisa's saying, there's so much data out there and there's so much information you can get. You should be very well versed on that company when you walk in the door, if you get the chance to walk in the door, or even a Zoom interview. Hopefully you've done your homework.
Exactly. Yeah, so we have a couple more questions from our audience. One is asking if we've seen an impact in salaries due to the pandemic. This is a great question. It's interesting, again, from the CDO, the Career Development Office perspective at Ross, we actually saw full-time salaries rise this past year, but most of those offers were given in the fall before this whole thing happened. So I'm curious to see how things happen. But from your perspective, David, Mark, Lisa, what have you seen, especially Lisa, maybe with negotiation abilities of people as they're getting jobs? Maybe you want to kick us off with your thoughts.
Absolutely. So I would say overall, salaries are going up. I think people are negotiating well and getting increases. And it has so much to do with individual companies, which is the theme I think we've been talking about. You know, smaller companies are going to, generally speaking, pay less, and you have to be ready for that if you're in the market and you're looking at smaller companies. But there are advantages to working for smaller companies, right? You know, you can get equity and things like that might pay off down the line. But yeah, Heather, I would say also people are doing, they continue to do really well financially.
I would echo that. We've seen that, especially last year, salaries were going up and then the pandemic hit, because going into last year, we were seeing things quite a bit on the rise and salaries were really going up. Then last year, they certainly cut back a little bit, but I still think you're going to find that in the areas we've already discussed today, there's going to be competitive situations and people are going to have to make very competitive salaries to get the right type of talent.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they'll continue to slowly rise.
Yeah. David, any additional thoughts on salaries?
Same point. You have to go to the specific, kinds of jobs. But as Mark said, the things we've been touching on, data science, different kinds of engineering, and for sure in especially the hottest areas of technology like artificial intelligence and cloud, human-centered design, even IT project management. If you're in those areas, there's strong, or digital marketing was another good example earlier. If you're in some of those hot areas, you are in demand, which means compensation is on an upward trend.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, another great question here from someone. When looking at staffing firms, what should you be on the lookout for when assessing capability and fit?
I guess, I'm not an expert, so I'm applying a little kind of consulting skill to the question. I guess if the goal the person has in mind is to follow Lisa's advice and kind of use that as an opportunity to either get new skills or get exposed to a potential long-term opportunity or get exposed to a potential long-term employer, I would be in a staffing firm or a contracting firm looking for, can they offer me opportunities that are going to be higher value to me and get me those skills and place me on high value projects and in the kind of companies that I'm hoping to end up with at the end of that strategy. So I think that's where I would start, is really digging into not just, providing my resume and kind of getting in the foot in the door and just letting me kind of be staffed where they may place me, but really digging into the quality of those opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If the point of the person is to get into a different company, then a staffing firm might be able to help them, because they'll be a little bit more lenient on the qualifications for the specific position, just for the fact that if they're there a week or two and it doesn't work out, the company can just say it's not working out and they can end it. That's certainly not going to be the case in a permanent position. If you're going into a middle or senior management position, they're not going to take that chance. So it could be an opportunity if you're trying to, change careers, so to speak, or, wedge your way into a little bit of a new industry.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, we're getting a few more questions here. Someone would love to hear tips on how to find roles in geographic areas outside of the one someone is located in, so outside of where you currently are, and any tips on compensation negotiation for jobs in different geographic areas.
I could start with that. Now, I think, Lisa, it's so easy to do research and find companies. There's just so much material out there. So I think you just have to go sit down and do some homework. Do some research, target certain areas that you're identifying, and put a list of companies together and go after them. David made a good point earlier. I'd be a little careful when I try to restrict geographics, because, people are opening up remote positions now that we never heard of before. That they never even considered have people working remote, and they say, this is working. We can do this now. So I wouldn't close too many doors on that end either. But yeah, I would just go to those areas, go do some homework, you can Google companies, you can look at, all sorts of material and find companies and then target certain people. All that data is readily available nowadays.
Mhm. Yeah, Lisa, do you have something to add on that, especially particularly negotiating in a different geographic area?
Yeah, right. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Mark said, and absolutely, you can go back to the tool I mentioned earlier, the Dun & Bradstreet, D&B Hoovers, and do research, and you can put in a radius, a zip code radius, and then do research a certain number of miles around that radius and add industry codes and size of company and really get it down to a nice size list. To say, looking for jobs outside your geographic zone, I think it's probably easier in a way to either say, well, what companies might I want to live in, for instance, or work out of, and do that, or even, wow, what companies might I be interested in? Who would my top 40 companies be, regardless of geography? So you've got to have an area of focus first, where that you can drill into versus kind of opening it up, so broadly. So I guess I would take that approach. And then Heather, you mentioned, negotiating, if you're not in that geography. I think more and more companies are flexible geographically, sure, in former times, and probably still to a degree, they're going to prefer candidates who are in their local city or state. But more and more, I think, especially if you have the qualifications, they're going to regard you just the same as they would anybody else.
If we talk about compensation, if the question was about negotiating compensation, that's a little bit tricky. It doesn't matter what the geographics are. I mean, that's what we do for a living. So, and so everybody knows some states you can't even talk about compensation anymore. And now there's laws that those employers can't even ask you what your current compensation is. They just have to deal with ranges and say, this is the target, that we're looking to fill. So it's a little bit different depending on what state you're targeting.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also have to look at relocation. So if you're targeting a certain area because you have a connection there and you're going to relocate yourself there, I would certainly say that to the client or the company. On the other hand, if you're looking for relocation costs, that may come into play.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you know what, I should add to that too, Heather. Of course, we have through Ross, through the CDO, right? We've got those statistics on landing by function, by industry, by degree, and by geography, right? Pretty much. I think we have geography as well. So you can always, depending on how many years out you are of school, you can always use that as a starting point, add a certain percentage, right, for each year, out of your MBA, for instance. So we've got great tools there. And then there are also, research, you can combine that with using these research databases like PayScale, for instance, is a good one to look at. Glassdoor has some good information on it. So when you factor all that together, it can really help you know how to negotiate, and how to set that number. Because usually now companies are asking you for that number. They don't want to waste anybody's time. So they'll often ask you going in, tell us what your expectations are. So you need to be ready to answer that question.
Yeah, great.
Of course, compensation is important, but there's other factors you should be looking at when considering a potential employer, what other benefits you're getting. But even more than that, I'd say, career growth opportunities, culture of the organization. Is this somewhere where I'm going to feel comfortable, where I'm going to thrive? So I don't want to focus only on compensation and not mention these other important factors as well.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that? Because again, we deal with this every day. David makes a great point. When we're talking to a candidate, and if they're really all focused on compensation, we're worried. And if you're interviewing for a position and you're focused totally on compensation and you're sending that message to that company, boy, they're going to be worried about it. I mean, they want to hear somebody be talking about opportunity, as and David mentioned, culture and people and where can I go next in the career. And yes, compensation is important to everybody, but if you make it the number one priority, they're going to read right through that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, such a good point. We talk about that a lot with people who are looking for their first post MBA or first post BBA job, about, this is your first step, and it's probably not only one of many jobs you'll have, but possibly one of many careers you may end up having in your lifespan. So looking at all of those factors is really important. Okay, we're getting a lot of great questions in here. Here's a good question about thoughts on M&A activity through 2021 and impact on hiring and job search. So mergers and acquisitions, are you thinking, what are you seeing or thinking might be happening, and how could that impact the job market?
There's a lot of M&A activity. There was a lot last year. There's a lot this year. I think most forecasts say that's going to remain high. When there's economic disruption, that tends to correlate with a lot of M&A activity. What does that mean to the job market? It kind of depends what side of that equation you're sitting on. If you're in the deal making side, then that suggests there would be strong employment opportunity. Depending on the strategies behind the M&A activity, it could mean job employment growth. It could mean some reduction in certain sectors, because some M&A activity is meant to find cost savings and efficiencies and so on. So I think most predictions say there will be M&A growth. The impact on job growth is a little bit more of it depends on your perspective, on where you sit in the equation answer.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. Any other thoughts, Mark or Lisa, on that one?
David really hit it on the nose. I thought you have to look at it this way. There could be opportunity with some, but for the most part, when you see major M&A activity, it's on the negative side. You look at financial institutions and some of the big mergers we've had. And we have one right in our market here in town, right, with Huntington and Chemical. For the most part, that's going to be in some reduction in staff and some key people. So it's going to have some effect, because that's what they do. I mean, that's, when you have a merger of that, they're going to cut some costs, and that tends to be on the staffing side, and that they're, consolidating operations, or consolidating human resources, or consolidating finance and marketing, all those different areas. So it tends to have a negative impact.
Mm-hmm. Great. We have another question in here about timing of looking for a job. So should people start looking now if they want to find a job, or should they wait it out a little bit until maybe things improve? What are your thoughts on that? Maybe Lisa, starting from the career coach perspective.
Right. I'm so glad you asked that question, Heather, because I think it's, oh gosh, Jim. I mean, I think it's really tempting to want to hold off and think, yeah, I'll wait till things get better. But honestly, I would just keep plugging away at it. I would keep plugging away because, as I said, I saw 10 to 12 people get offers right before the holidays. And who would have thought that? I mean, for each of those 10 to 12 people, there were another 10 to 12 people who said to me, oh, I'm not really going to look in December because I really don't think people do hiring in December. Not the case. So, jobs come and go in their own time. I think there's this feeling that people hire at a certain time of year, and Mark Angott, maybe you would chime in on this, but I think that when there's a need, companies are hiring, and you have to be there and ready when they're looking for people.
We had one of our clients hire on New Year's Eve. I mean, and we do hear that line. People say, well, I'm not going to do much in December. I'm not going to do much of the holidays. And I would tell somebody, if you're thinking it's the right time to make a career move, don't wait. It may take longer, but that's okay. But you don't know when the diamond in the rough comes up and you're ahead of the curve, and some other people did sit on the sidelines and you're there and the right opportunity knocks on the door. I don't think there's any reason why I'd sit on the sidelines. If you think it's the right time in your career to be making a move, because it may take some time. And let's face it, one thing that's happened in the pandemic, and we can speak to this, is hiring processes have taken longer. And that's because typically companies would they might have done a phone screen first, and then they would just bring people in for an interview to meet everybody, 5, 6 key people. Now you have a Zoom interview, and then you might have another Zoom interview with 1 or 2 more people. Then you have another Zoom interview with 1 or 2 more people. Well, the process has just taken much longer from A to Z. So echoing that on the timing, if you're thinking about making a move, don't wait, because it may take a little bit longer than you anticipated.
And a lot of that timeline is on yourself about preparation, as you both have said. So putting in the time now about things like updating your resume to be as compelling as possible, the research that Lisa and Mark talked about potential sectors or companies, the network homework of looking at things like U of M alumni databases and social media and so on. Those take some time, and there's no time like the present. Even if you think you're not necessarily looking to make a move immediately, those things take time. So there's really no reason not. Let alone also, one of our tips has been, maybe get a certificate or take a class or something to bolster your credentials. Also takes time. So I agree with my colleagues here. I think get to work and start putting in the time now.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of great courses on Coursera for people to look at. Just thousands of different courses, great things, some from Michigan and Michigan Ross professors out there. So it's a good place to look. All right, we're going to go with one more question. And this is an interesting one. David, I might want to hear from you first, just as a company that has a massive hiring machine on this. But this is something that came up a lot when we were talking about how we were going to approach recruiting this year. And it's the equity of what happens if some candidates are seen virtually and some are seen in person. Now, it turned out for us, it was easy this year because everything we knew was going to be virtual. But when we were first starting to have the conversations and thinking about the timing and hoping to return to normal sooner rather than later, this was a topic of conversation that we had, was how could we ensure that candidates would be seen equitably, whether they showed up virtually on screen or in person. And so I'm curious about that, and how do companies maybe try to correct for that perhaps implicit bias?
Well, I guess for us at least, I think we're like 100% virtual interviewing. So there's no advantage one way or the other. I think everyone's kind of in the same boat. We've tried to follow our same recruiting techniques and adopt that to a virtual world. So in the consulting side of our business, we use an interviewing technique called case studies. And we've tried to adapt that to a virtual environment. It's actually a little more challenging than it sounds. Our hiring criteria, what we're looking for, haven't changed at all. Our recruiting practitioners haven't, we're using our same individuals, just in a technology environment. So from an in-person versus virtual, I don't think there's much advantage one way or the other. If the question was getting more at diversity and inclusion, I think we and a lot of companies have been working on this for a long time and then re-looking in the past 12 months. So we are doing things like every professional involved in campus recruiting this year had to go through an implicit bias training. Mm-hmm. We're revisiting all of our recruiting processes. We're revisiting things like our referral processes to see, is there any implicit bias built into that? So wasn't exactly sure the definition of equity in the question, but either dimension, I think these are sensitive topics that a lot of big corporations are working on addressing.
And it'll be interesting to see as the vaccine rolls out more and as companies return more in person, there will be likely a mix of some being in person and some being virtual. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. Mark, any thoughts from you on that, or Lisa, before we go to final remarks?
Interesting question. I would just say, if I had the choice and I was actively pursuing a position and I was excited about that company, if I had the choice, I'd want to go in person. I think you could just make a better presentation and get the chance to just open up more and be yourself. So, that's the only thing I could add.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And I would also say just underscores the importance of, I think, David, you said this earlier, being savvy with technology, with Zoom and with video conferencing, really, confirming that your lighting works, confirming that your Wi-Fi is strong in your house, and really take care of those details ahead of time.
Okay, let's move to just final remarks before we close out. Just final thoughts, tips that you may have for the audience. And Mark, we'll start with you and then go to David and Lisa.
So I would say a couple of things. Be a lifelong learner. Always continue to strive to get ahead. I talked earlier about networking. I don't think you can do it enough. And now it's so much easier to do. Lisa talked about the research part of it. I just think it's so critical to do that. And you have an advantage being at such a great school as Michigan and Ross alumni. Use it. I mean, it is an advantage. David, you started off with that, and people need to use that. And if you can reach out to people that are Ross alumni, it's a tremendous resource. I would also tell people, if you're actively looking to find a position, learn to interview. You might say that's easy. No, it takes practice. David, you probably interview a lot of people. A lot of people just don't interview well because they're not prepared. You know, they might ask the first question to tell me about yourself and they ramble on for 20 minutes. I tell people, hey, 2 to 3 minute life story, get the client talking, get the people on the other side of the desk talking to you. There's a lot of interviewing tips. And if somebody does some homework on that, they'll be much better prepared. They need to practice it. It's the same as writing a resume. You need to have a professional resume. And if I was somebody that was looking for a position, I'd send it to somebody for some advice before I'd send it out to the open market. And probably somebody there, Heather or Lisa, would help them with that, their career coach, before I put it out to the market. Because, you know, we all said those resumes get looked at really quickly, and you need to stand out and make a quick impression. So I would work on that as well if I was actively looking at a position.
All right, thanks, David.
Yeah, Mark hit a lot of great points. I would reinforce the networking, and when one of my recruiters told me in preparation, like, a goal should be get to a human, make a human contact. I think that really stood out to me. Don't just submit your resume and assume, like, and hope for the best. Like, go the extra mile to try to make a human connection. And I would also say, similar to what Mark said, don't turn down interviews. If someone contacts you, likes your resume, says we want to talk, take that offer. It's both good practice, and you never know when a company or a role might be more interesting than you initially thought. So those would be a couple closing thoughts.
Great. All right, Lisa, over to you.
Sure. So I would say let's all hope that the latter half of 2021 picks up in the job market, especially, fall, winter, as we get a critical mass of people vaccinated. And all of us who have been working and are finally able to begin to spend that money that we've been saving, right? So I would say now is a good time, even if the job market isn't going to pick up hugely until the latter half of 2021, now is a good time to start doing that soul searching, get clarity on what you want to do next, work on refreshing your marketing materials, identify those target companies like we've been talking about, so that you can be ready to take advantage of the opportunities that are going to be out there, right? And if you need help in the process, like we've been talking about, whether it be with resume reviews, with mock interviews, or even with research, feel free to reach out to me. I'm here for you.
All right.
Lisa, I would also echo that if people want another sounding board or have a question offline, I'm happy to help at any time. They can email me or call me. Happy to add a word or two.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate all of the insights and thoughts, and great discussion here from our panelists. So Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Heather. I would like to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. We'd appreciate to hear your feedback on how this event went, along with what you would like to see and hear about for future offerings. So FYI, the Southeast Michigan Club at Michigan Ross is hosting a 2021 Finance Outlook panel on Thursday, January 28th at 6 p.m. with Ross Professor Amiyatosh Purnanamdam. We'd love to see everyone there. Thank you again for joining. Be well, be safe. We look forward to seeing you again at a club event sometime in the near future. Go Blue.